Welcome back to the Redraft Show, brought to you by the FFD Fantasy and sponsored by ProfitX. And I'm here today to get into some wide receiver must starts and sits, but more importantly, to give you the Pleasure Chest champions for Week 6, the Chev GPT Pleasure Chest champions for Week 6, and the Chev GPT Lost Boys for Week 6. So let's get into the countdown. Starting with Calvin Ridley coming in at my wide receiver 30. Now, I've got him ahead of Keon Coleman and behind Rashid Shaheed. Calvin Ridley's taking on the Las Vegas Raiders this week, and the Raiders play middle of the field close, cover 3 at the highest rate in the NFL. He leads the Titans in first read targets. You saw him come alive last week in the desert in Arizona, and I think he's going to go to another desert and have a big game. So really excited for Calvin Ridley as my number 4 Pleasure Chest champion on the week. Now, here we are with a guy who we wrote off for dead way too soon, okay? And that guy is Mr. Stefon Diggs. Diggs' obituary was written immediately when he fell off of a cliff production-wise when Joe Brady took over in Buffalo. And then, last year he tears his ACL and he's a 30-year-old receiver and everybody just wrote him off. But here these last 2 weeks, he's averaging 20.7 fantasy points per game. And now I have him as my wide receiver 15. And you might gasp at that, but it's right ahead of Quentin Johnston and right behind Rome Odunze. So really excited to see what Stefon Diggs does. He's playing full time now after fully recovering from the ACL injury. And Diggs averages 0.88 fantasy points per route run. That's 7th in the entire NFL. So we have him returning to his old ways and the Patriots finding ways to get him involved and get him the ball. And that's resulting in a lot of fantasy points. And I think that continues against the Saints this week. Moving on to my number 2 Pleasure Chest champion. It's going to be Tetairoa McMillan, the Big Pineapple versus the Dallas Cowboys. I have him ahead of Deebo Samuel and just behind George Pickens as my wide receiver 10. So we're talking about Tetairoa McMillan, and alliteration aside, we've been so close to one of those splash highlight plays that make you feel like you're watching something really special. But here's the deal. We know that we're watching something special. It just hasn't borne itself into fantasy points yet. But the Cowboys seem like a get-right matchup for anybody that's taking on, for any fantasy receiver looking to have a day. So I've got him ahead of Deebo Samuel and behind George Pickens. Just like I said, the Cowboys are the ultimate get-right spot for fantasy wide receivers. And they've allowed the most explosive plays of 40 yards or more, and like the fifth most plays of 20 yards or more. And they're not really rushing the passer at all. So Bryce Young, when not pressured, I know they had 5 sacks versus the Jets, but that's more of a Jets thing than it is than them actually having a good pass rush. But they've allowed 12 passing touchdowns as well. So we could get Tetairoa McMillan with his first receiving touchdown this week. We've been close a few times. It's a matter of if or when, not if, when we're talking about the Big Pineapple, Tetairoa McMillan. And for this week, I have a same game bonus matchup as my dual threat Pleasure Chest champion, my double donger Pleasure Chest champions of the week. I've got Garrett Wilson and Cortland Sutton as my Pleasure Chest champions. So Garrett Wilson is averaging 1.33 fantasy points per route run versus man coverage. Denver plays man coverage at one of the highest rates in the entire NFL. And that's plenty for me. I mean, the passing game goes through Mason Taylor, Garrett Wilson, and Breece Hall now. That's where we're at. And that's where we're going to be until they turn from Justin Fields to Tyrod Taylor, or maybe they bring Jameis over the bridge or I don't even know how you get to the Jets part of the Giants stadium. Anywho, we're really, really into Garrett Wilson this week. And in the same game, we really love Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton taking on this Jets passing attack or passing defense, not passing attack, but taking on the Jets passing defense, who They've allowed 20 plays or 19 plays of 20-plus yards. They play man coverage at a really high rate. Courtland Sutton succeeds against man coverage as one of the better big-bodied separators in the entire NFL. So we're playing Courtland Sutton and Garrett Wilson as our pleasure chest champions of the week. So we've given you 5 names, just to recap. We've got Calvin Ridley coming in at our wide receiver 30, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. We got Stefon Diggs coming in as our wide receiver 15, taking on the Saints. We've got Tetairoa McMillan taking on the Dallas Cowboys, our wide receiver 10. And then we've got a double bonus, double donger, double header. We're taking Garrett Wilson and Courtland Sutton as our pleasure chest champions of the week in the same game. Again, Denver plays a lot of man coverage. Are you worried about Patrick Surtain? Yeah, somewhat. But, Garrett Wilson's Garrett Wilson, and he's, so well paid to get open against guys like Patrick Surtain. So I think that could go well. And Courtland Sutton, the Jets have allowed a ton of explosive plays, and they don't turn the ball over, and they're not able to really rush the passer. I don't know. Will McDonald, where are you? Talk to me. Talk to me. Nice. We don't really know. So that leads me to believe this could be another big week for Courtland Sutton. Again, Bo Nix, when not pressured, is one of the highest EPA per play quarterbacks in the entire NFL. So we've given you, 5 names. Now let's get into 4 more plays that I'm not a fan of this week. And the number 4 lost boy for this week is going to be DK Metcalf versus the Cleveland Browns. Now, Cleveland Browns allow the least fantasy points per game to wide receivers. The Steelers quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, is predicted to be under the 7th most quick pressure this week. And he has a negative EPA per play of over 1 point, negative 1 point per attempt when pressured. So I was trying to figure out how to convey that to you guys. But yeah, you just saw me work that out in real time. But yeah, it's not a great matchup. I'm not bullish on him. He's going to get a face full of Denzel Ward, no Diddy, and that's not going to work well. And then, so we move on to Chris Olave. So Chris Olave takes on the New England Patriots. This is just a hell in a cell matchup for him, man. He's been one of the leaders in expected fantasy points. He's still on pace for a ridiculous amount of targets. We come back to earth a little bit in terms of the way that he was, everybody's expecting him to break out. He gets a score, but it's just not happening. I don't think it's going to happen this week. Potentially, we had Rashid Shaheed, who's significantly better versus man coverage than Chris Olave. And he's got to face, he's either going to, if he goes to the slot, he's got to take on what's my man's name? Marcus Jones. So I told a story on the other episode where, Calvin Austin, who I've known since he was really young, told me that Marcus Jones was one of the most tough covers that he's ever faced, at the collegiate level. So seeing him play well now, and then you have Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis, who's a hold extraordinaire. So, he's only averaging 3.35 fantasy points per route run versus man coverage, and the Patriots play man coverage at a 32% clip. So this could be more of a floor than a ceiling outcome, if you get what I'm saying. Now, this one's going to hurt some souls because it hurts my soul because I had bought into the belief that Liam Cohen had come to Duval and he was going to turn things around for Brian Thomas Jr. Hey, I see what you're doing for Travis Etienne. I just need you to do it for Brian Thomas Jr. too.
What's good? You know the phrase, the house always wins? Well, not anymore with our new sponsor, Profit X. Profit X, America's #1 sports prediction market, is a peer-to-peer sports prediction market where users play against each other instead of a sports book versus the house. You almost always get the best price in any spread, money line, total, and player prop since you're playing against other people rather than the book. It looks just like a sports book, but with way better odds. So what are you waiting for? Go download the app and use promo code FFD to claim up to $200 in profit cash on all the plays you use in the first 30 days of playing on site. Link in the description. Now, let's go looking around here, fishing around. What do we like? What do we see? We just did the P-Whopper episode with Joseph here. So we're going to take a look at one of our P-Whopper Route-based heroes, we're going to go select receiving yards. We're in the Cleveland Browns game. Jerry Jeudy was on the list. Jerry Jeudy over 38.5 yards. We're going to smash play that one. The P-Whopper's been absolutely amazing with Joseph, so make sure you're signed up using promo code FFB and follow us through these plays. Jerry Jeudy over 38.5 yards. Peace.
Okay. But Brian Thomas Jr. is my wide receiver 17 on the week, which feels like it would have been blasphemous if I would have said this at the beginning of September 3rd, or before, September 6th, the day before kickoff. If I said this, Brian Thomas Jr. is my wide receiver 17, you'd be like, yeah, you're crazy. Why do you hate Brian Thomas Jr.? And here we are a month later, and it's just not great for anybody. So we're talking about Brian Thomas Jr., them taking on the Seattle Seahawks. They play a ton of middle of the field open defense, which is bad for explosive plays. And Brian Thomas Jr. and Trevor Lawrence just can't seem to get on the same page. But that's more of a function of Shane Waldron than it is someone like Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter, who's a one-of-a-kind unicorn of a prospect, and you can't figure it out, Jags. But back to Brian Thomas Jr., Seahawks have allowed no plays of 40-plus yards, if I'm not mistaken. And I take that back, because they allowed Emeka Egbuka a 40-yard play. Or maybe it wasn't. But anyway, we'll have to get our crack research team on that. But it just hasn't been great for Brian Thomas Jr., and I don't think the Seahawks are a get-right spot for a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. And then, last but not least, we're going to talk about Quentin Johnston. So Quentin Johnston taking on the Miami Dolphins. Now he's been off to a red hot start, but this is just not the typical matchup where he thrives in. So he's only averaging 0.19 targets per route run versus zone. Okay. And that's third on his own team. Okay. Behind Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen. And I think that they're going to get robbed. We're going to get robbed of about a month's worth of fun attempts and fun football, because that Chargers offensive line is so porous right now, with Joe Alt being out for at least a few more weeks, and Rashawn Slater being lost for the year, and Lindsey Pipkins, or whoever the right tackle dude is, just committing penalties left and right, and Mekhi Becton missing time with a concussion. Anyway, we're alluding to all these things as reasons why you shouldn't expect ceiling outcomes from the Chargers in terms of explosive passing plays, at least for the next few weeks, till they can get that offensive line figured out. So that's why I have Quentin Johnston still at my wide receiver 16, because I'm leaving room for myself for me to be wrong, these rankings to be completely asinine. But I do believe that this is not a great matchup for him, and that's why he lands here. So just to recap, we're going to run through, 1 through 36. We'll give you 10 at a time. So my wide receiver 1 on the week is obviously Puka Nacua. And then we've got JSN at wide receiver 2, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Emeka Egbuka, Cortland Sutton, George Pickens, and Tetairoa McMillan is my wide receiver 10, followed by Deebo Samuel, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Adams, Rome Odunze, Stefon Diggs, Quentin Johnston, Brian Thomas Jr., Devonta Smith, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Keenan Allen is my wide receiver 20. Then moving on, Xavier Worthy, who almost made the Pleasure Chest champions. It's a very advantageous matchup in a 50.5 point over-under versus a team that plays a lot of man coverage in the Detroit Lions. But we'll talk about that when we talk about it. Actually, we just talked about it right now. So you do with that information what you will. Xavier Worthy might be a strong play this week. You heard it here first. You know that. If you drafted him, you've been waiting for this. But my bad. I didn't mean to derail us there. So my wide receiver 22 after all that is going to be A.J. Brown taking on the New York Giants tonight. Michael Pittman's my wide receiver 23. Zay Flowers is my wide receiver 24. Jacoby Myers, 25. Chris Olave, one of the lost boys for week 6, wide receiver 26. T. Higgins, Ladd McConkey, Ladarius McConkey, the first and the third, is my wide receiver 28. My wide receiver 29 is going to be Rashid Shaheed, and wide receiver 30 is going to be Calvin Ridley. And then the last 6, Keon Coleman, my wide receiver 31, Jameson Williams at 32, DJ Moore at 33, DK Metcalf at 34, Romeo Doubs and Khalil Shakir close us out. So, yeah, those are the top 36. This has been another episode of the Pleasure Chess Champions and the Lost Boys. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends. Like, download, comment, subscribe. And then, if you want to get into making your own rankings and stuff, go over and download the League Champ app available in the Google Play Store and the App Store. Now, as I always leave you, there's ball watchers and there's ball knowers. Assign yourselves accordingly. Good luck this week.